Have you ever considered how our relationship with nature is not just about coexistence, but sometimes it turns into a full-scale war? Yes, you heard that right. War with nature. It's an unusual concept, isn't it? Yet, throughout history, humankind has found itself locked in combat with the natural world, sometimes quite literally. This conflict often arises from the need to control or even eradicate certain species. The reasons behind these drastic measures vary, but they're usually driven by a desire to protect the delicate balance of our ecosystems. Alternatively, they might be necessary to safeguard human life and property. These aren't your typical wars, fought with armies on battlefields. They're battles of wits and resources, waged against creatures who simply don't understand the concept of borders or property rights. They're strange, they're fascinating, and sometimes, they're downright absurd. Strange as it may sound, humans have fought some bizarre wars against nature. Let's dive into history to uncover these battles. Imagine a war where the enemy is not another country, but a bird. Welcome to the Emu War. In the early 1930s, Australia found itself in a peculiar battle against a flightless bird, the emu. This was a time of economic hardship. The Great Depression was taking its toll, and Australian farmers were struggling. They had another problem too. About 20,000 emus migrating inland from the coast, in search of water and food. As they moved, they laid waste to the farmers' lands, destroying crops and causing substantial agricultural damage. The farmers, many of whom were World War I veterans, did what soldiers do best. They called for military assistance. The Australian government, led by the Minister of Defence, agreed to send in the troops. Armed with Lewis guns, a type of light machine gun, the military was ready to take on the emus. But they soon found out that this was not going to be a walk in the park. Emus are fast, they're tough, and they're surprisingly clever for a bird. The military's initial strategies were unsuccessful. The emus scattered and ran in all directions, their speed and the rough terrain making them difficult targets. The soldiers couldn't get close enough for a clear shot. In fact, it's reported that out of 1,000 rounds fired in the first battle, only a dozen emus were taken down. Despite the challenges, the war continued for several weeks. The soldiers tried different tactics, including trying to herd the emus into a tight group for a more effective attack, but the emus seemed to always be one step ahead. In the end, the war was called off. The emus had proven to be a formidable opponent. The Australian military had used over 10,000 rounds of ammunition, and yet the emu population had barely been dented. It was a humbling experience for the humans who thought they could easily control nature. So in the end, who really won the Emu War? The emus, who continue to thrive, or the humans, who tried to control them? From a bird to a beast, our next war shifts to North America and the great bison. A symbol of the wilderness and the spirit of the West, the bison once roamed the plains of North America in vast herds. Their numbers were estimated to be in the millions, perhaps as many as 60 million at their peak. However, with the arrival of settlers in the 19th century, the bison's existence took a dramatic turn. The new settlers saw the bison as a resource to be exploited, their hides valuable for leather and their meat providing sustenance. This led to a mass culling, an overhunting of epic proportions, that saw the bison's population decimated. In a matter of a few decades, the bison, once the monarch of the plains, was reduced to mere hundreds. The reasons behind this mass culling were multifaceted. The settlers' demand for hides and meat played a significant role, but there were also more sinister motives at play. Some believed that by eliminating the bison, they could also undermine the livelihood of the Native American tribes who relied on the bison for their survival. The consequences of this culling were dire, not just for the bison, but also for the ecosystem they inhabited. As a keystone species, the bison played a critical role in maintaining the health and diversity of the prairie ecosystem. Their near extinction disrupted this balance, leading to unforeseen changes in the landscape. Yet, the bison's story is not one of despair, but of resilience. Efforts to protect and conserve the bison began in the early 20th century, with the establishment of reserves and the enactment of hunting restrictions. These measures have helped bring the bison back from the brink, their numbers slowly recovering, though they remain a fraction of what they once were. The bison's story is a stark reminder of how human actions can tip the balance of nature. It underscores the importance of conservation and the need for us to coexist with the creatures who share our planet. Because in the end, our survival is intrinsically linked to theirs. Australia seems to be a battleground for human-nature wars. This time, it's the infamous cane toads. The story of these amphibians is one of good intentions gone awry. Back in the 1930s, Australian farmers were dealing with a beetle menace that was wreaking havoc on their sugarcane crops. In an attempt to control the beetles, they introduced 102 cane toads from Hawaii, hoping they'd be the perfect predators. But as we know, nature can be unpredictable. Instead of controlling the beetles, the toads began to multiply, becoming a pest themselves. With no natural predators in Australia, their population exploded into the millions. They spread across the vast continent, from Queensland to the Northern Territory, and even into New South Wales. These toads weren't just an annoyance, they became a real threat to local fauna. You see, cane toads produce a potent toxin that can be deadly to other animals. Native species that attempted to eat the toads often ended up poisoned, leading to a decline in their populations. This unexpected twist forced Australians to take drastic measures. They began to mobilize against the toads, organizing toad-busting events, where communities would gather to catch and humanely dispose of the toads. Scientists also started researching methods to control the toad population, including the use of diseases and genetic modification. But despite these efforts, the cane toads continue to thrive and spread. Their invasion has had a profound impact on Australia's unique ecosystems, causing shifts in the food chain and altering habitats. The cane toads are a classic example of how a solution can sometimes become a bigger problem. Their story serves as a reminder of the delicate balance of nature and how even well-intentioned human interventions can lead to unforeseen consequences. Our battles with nature are often more complex than they appear, and the invasion of cane toads in Australia is a testament to that complexity. The next war takes us to the UK, where the cute but invasive grey squirrels have been causing havoc. In the late 19th century, the grey squirrel was introduced from North America to Britain. A seemingly harmless act, but it sparked a battle that continues to this day. The grey squirrels, adaptable and resilient, thrived in their new environment. However, their success came at a cost to the native red squirrels. You see, these two species are not on equal footing. The grey squirrels are larger, more aggressive, and carry a virus, the squirrel pox, to which they are immune, but fatal to the red squirrels. As the grey squirrels spread, the red squirrels' numbers dwindled, their existence in the UK gravely threatened. Efforts to control the grey squirrel population have been varied and ongoing. They range from humane trapping and sterilization to more controversial culling methods. Conservation areas have been established for red squirrels, where grey squirrels are strictly controlled. But the fight is far from over. Despite these efforts, the grey squirrels continue to proliferate, and the red squirrel's survival remains uncertain. But the British people, known for their love of wildlife, have not given up. In this war against nature, the battle lines are drawn not in sand, but in the leafy canopies of the UK's woodlands. The war against the grey squirrels continues, with the red squirrel's survival hanging in the balance. Finally, we travel to New Zealand, where the Himalayan tahr has been waging a war of its own. Originally introduced for hunting in the early 20th century, these resilient creatures have multiplied beyond expectation. They've become a formidable force, and their impact on the local ecosystem is far from negligible. The Himalayan tahr is a hardy species, adapted to the rugged mountain terrain that makes up so much of New Zealand's landscape. They graze on native vegetation, causing significant damage to the unique flora of this island nation. This has resulted in a drastic shift in the ecosystem, threatening the survival of native plant species and impacting other wildlife that depend on these plants for survival. Recognizing the mounting ecological crisis, the New Zealand government has taken decisive action. They've implemented a tahr management plan aimed at controlling the population of these nimble mountain dwellers. This has involved a combination of hunting, trapping, and even aerial shooting to reduce their numbers and limit their spread. It's a contentious issue, with strong opinions on both sides. Some argue for the preservation of the tahr as part of New Zealand's hunting heritage, while others stress the need for ecological balance and the protection of native flora and fauna. As the tahr management continues, it shows us that the war against nature is ongoing, and sometimes necessary. As we've seen, our wars against nature are as varied as they are complex. From the unexpected Emu War in Australia, where military force was pitted against birds, to the great culling of bison in North America, a tragic example of how humans can decimate a species for economic gain. In Australia, again, we saw how the introduction of cane toads as a pest control solution spiraled into an environmental disaster. And then, There's the UK's ongoing struggle to control the invasive grey squirrels, an example of how human-introduced species can disrupt an entire ecosystem. And let's not forget New Zealand's Tahr management, an ongoing battle to balance the needs of hunting enthusiasts, conservationists, and the delicate alpine environment. In the end, the question remains, can we truly win a war against nature, or do we need to find a better way to coexist?